There's a conflict raging thousands of kilometers away. And, while it might feel worlds apart, its shockwaves are heading right for our doorstep. Not with weapons, but in the form of an economic crisis that's going to affect every single one of us. So, how did this happen? And what does it actually mean for our day-to-day lives? Let's get into it. The Prime Minister recently warned of a new crisis, and the source material we're exploring today puts it in some pretty stark terms. It's potentially more dangerous than COVID. Now, that is a huge statement, right? But here's the key difference. COVID was a health crisis that took away our freedom to move around. This, according to the analysis, is a financial crisis that's going to put a real strain on our wallets. And that's really the big question, isn't it? How does a geopolitical fight in the Middle East translate into the price of the gas in our kitchens or the cost of food at our local markets? Well, to get that, we've got to first understand what this conflict is really all about. What the analysis points out is that this isn't some new fight that just popped up. Nope, it's the climax of a struggle that's been brewing for 40 years, driven by some very specific, very long-term goals. And understanding those goals is the key to unpacking the crisis we're facing today. The source material we're looking at says Iran's objective over the last 4 decades really boils down to 2 main things. Number 1, the complete elimination of the State of Israel, and number 2, to basically control the region by undermining the neighboring Sunni-led Gulf countries. The goal is to become the supreme power over there.
So this is where it gets really interesting because the source explains this isn't a traditional war. It's being fought through this whole network of proxy groups. You've probably heard of them: Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. The idea is they're armed, they're trained, and they're directed to carry out attacks on Iran's enemies. It's like fighting a war without ever having to fire your own shots directly.
And this slide really breaks down why, according to this analysis, the world sees Iran's nuclear program so differently from India's. On one hand, you have India, which developed its nukes for national defense and has a strict no-first-use policy. But on the other hand, the analysis points out that Iran is openly chasing a bomb with the stated goal of enemy destruction, and they're already at 70% uranium enrichment. That's a huge difference.
Okay, so we've got the military and political picture. But how does all of that suddenly morph into a war on the global economy? Well, the new battlefield isn't land. It's our financial systems, and the new weapons are attacks on the very infrastructure that keeps our world running.
You can think of it like a chain reaction. The source highlights one specific event: an attack on a huge gas facility in Qatar. Now get this one place supplies almost half of the world's gas. A 17% drop in its output, just like that, creates a massive global shortage. And with repairs expected to take 5 years and cost billions, this isn't a problem that's going away anytime soon. And it's not just on land. The war has gone maritime. The source claims that for ships to pass safely through the supercritical Strait of Hormuz, they're now being forced to pay a $2 million extortion fee. Think of it as an unofficial tax. And guess what? That cost doesn't just vanish. It gets baked into the price of everything, and it's passed right on down to us. All right, so let's bring this all back home. This global crisis is about to hit India in 2 very different ways, creating a sort of dual problem for our energy security and, well, for our household budgets.
So, let's talk about cooking gas first. The problem here is simple, and it's pretty severe: a shortage. The source projects that India could face a 40 to 50% drop in gas availability. And why? Because our main suppliers, places like Qatar and Dubai, have had their production plants directly attacked.
Okay, if you remember just one thing from this entire explainer, please make it this slide. This is so important. The crisis for gas and the crisis for oil are totally different. For gas, it's a shortage. We might actually run low on the product itself. For oil, so petrol and diesel, we'll still have supply, mostly thanks to Russia. The problem there is a massive price increase, driven by higher transport costs and those new transit fees. So one is a supply problem, the other is a price problem. And of course, it doesn't just stop with fuel. Energy is the lifeblood of the economy, right? When fuel gets more expensive, everything gets more expensive. It means our farmers will pay more for fertilizer. The truck that brings vegetables to your local market, it costs more to run. All of that leads to widespread inflation.
So that all sounds pretty grim. The big question is, what can we actually do about it? The source material doesn't just lay out the problem. It also gives some pretty practical advice for all of us at home and a broader message for the country as a whole.
First things first, we need to get our heads around what this crisis actually is. Unlike the COVID lockdowns, our freedom isn't going to be restricted. We can go to work, shops will be open, but life is just going to feel harder financially. The struggle will be in our bank accounts, not in our homes.
So based on that expected gas shortage, the source gives some really direct, really practical advice for every household. Number 1, get an induction stove and the right pots and pans for it now before everyone rushes out to buy one. Number 2, brace yourself for a tough 6 to 12 months. And 3, if you can, look for ways to boost your income.
But at the end of the day, the analysis circles back to a message of resilience, and it uses a quote from Prime Minister Modi. The message is pretty clear. This crisis is coming from the outside, and we can't avoid it. But how we respond, that can be internal, that can be unified. We can meet the challenge if we face it together.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. We've just seen how a war thousands of miles away can directly affect our kitchens. It kind of forces you to ask, in a world that is this interconnected, where one single attack can throw global supply chains into chaos, what does it even mean to be prepared anymore? Not just for a government, but for each and every one of our families.